My name is Geraldine, and at 58 years old, I thought I knew everything about my husband of 32 years. Robert was my rock, my steady companion. Through decades of teaching elementary school, while he worked his quiet magic in finance. When his heart gave out last March, I believed his greatest gift to me was our beautiful memories together. I was wrong. 3 days after his funeral, I discovered he had left me something that would either save my life or destroy it. $23 million hidden in accounts I never knew existed. What I didn't know was that this fortune would turn my own son into my greatest enemy. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe because this story will show you how sometimes the people closest to us can become our biggest threat. Now let me tell you how I discovered the truth about my late husband's fortune. For 32 years, Robert and I lived what anyone would call a comfortable middle-class life in our colonial house in Fairfield, Connecticut. He left for his financial consulting job every morning at 7:15 sharp, briefcase in hand, while I prepared lesson plans for my third-grade class at Meadowbrook Elementary. Our routine was as predictable as sunrise. Weekend grocery runs to Stop and Shop, Sunday dinners with the newspaper spread across our kitchen table, and quiet evenings watching PBS together on our old leather couch. Robert was always private about his work. When I asked about his day, he would smile and say, "Numbers and spreadsheets, sweetheart, nothing that would interest you." I respected that boundary. After all, I didn't burden him with stories about playground disputes and parent conferences either. We each had our professional worlds, and our home was our sanctuary where we could simply be ourselves. Our two children painted very different pictures of success and struggle. Marcus, our 32-year-old son, had inherited his father's intelligence, but none of his discipline. Even as a child, Marcus expected everything to be handed to him. Birthday parties had to be elaborate affairs, Christmas mornings required mountains of gifts, and any disappointment triggered explosive tantrums that could last for hours. As an adult, those tantrums had evolved into sophisticated manipulation tactics that he used to extract money from us regularly. Sarah, our 28-year-old daughter, had taken a completely different path. After graduating from NYU with a degree in social work, she moved to Portland, Oregon, where she worked with at-risk teenagers. Our conversations were brief but warm, usually limited to holiday calls and the occasional text message about her latest hiking adventure or volunteer project. She had always been independent, sometimes to a fault, but I respected her need for space and her dedication to helping others. The tension between Robert and Marcus had been escalating for years. Marcus worked sporadically as a freelance graphic designer, but his income never seemed sufficient for his lifestyle. He lived in an expensive apartment in Manhattan, drove a BMW he couldn't afford, and frequented restaurants that cost more for one meal than I spent on groceries in a week. When bills came due, Marcus would appear at our doorstep with elaborate stories about delayed payments from clients or unexpected expenses that required immediate family assistance. Robert had grown increasingly frustrated with these requests. Their last conversation, just 2 weeks before Robert died, had ended with harsh words. Marcus had asked for $15,000 to cover what he claimed were business expansion costs. Robert refused, stating firmly that Marcus needed to learn financial responsibility. Marcus stormed out, shouting that his father never believed in him and that successful parents support their children's dreams. I tried to play peacemaker, but Robert remained resolute. "Geraldine," he said that night, "sometimes the greatest disservice we can do to our children is to save them from the consequences of their choices." When Robert collapsed in our garage that Tuesday evening, clutching his chest and gasping for air, my world shattered in an instant. The paramedics worked frantically, but the massive heart attack had already claimed him. At the hospital, as I sat in those sterile waiting room chairs, I couldn't process that my partner of 3 decades was gone. The funeral arrangements, the stream of visitors offering casseroles and condolences, the overwhelming paperwork, it all passed in a blur of grief and exhaustion. After the memorial service, when the last neighbor had departed, and the house fell into that hollow silence that only comes after loss, I faced the daunting task of sorting through Robert's belongings. His clothes still carried his scent. His reading glasses sat exactly where he had left them, on his nightstand, and his coffee mug remained unwashed in the kitchen sink. I wasn't ready to disturb these remnants of his presence, but practical matters demanded attention. Robert's home office had always been his private domain, a converted spare bedroom lined with built-in bookshelves containing his financial journals, industry publications, and the computer where he managed what I assumed were our modest retirement accounts. As I began organizing his papers, preparing for meetings with our estate attorney and accountant, I discovered how little I actually knew about my husband's professional life. The filing cabinets contained meticulous records dating back 25 years. Investment statements, tax documents, and correspondence with various financial institutions painted a picture of someone far more sophisticated than the humble consultant I had married. As I dug deeper, searching for the basic information our attorney requested, I noticed something odd about the bookshelf behind Robert's desk. One section seemed to sit differently than the others, as though it had been moved recently. Curiosity overcoming my respect for Robert's privacy, I pulled on that section of shelving. To my amazement, it swung open like a door, revealing a hidden space containing a small but heavy safe. My hands trembled as I stared at this secret vault that my husband had concealed for years. Who was this man I thought I knew completely? I spent the next hour searching frantically for any clue to the combination. Robert's methodical nature suggested he would have recorded it somewhere accessible but secure. Finally, in his personal journal, tucked between pages, discussing his concerns about Marcus's gambling habits, I found a series of numbers written in his careful handwriting. The date of our wedding anniversary, our address numbers, and Sarah's birthday combined in a sequence only I would recognize. The safe opened with a soft click that seemed to echo through my entire world. Inside, I found documents that made my knees weak, bank statements from Swiss accounts showing balances that seemed impossible, investment portfolios spanning decades with holdings in companies whose names I recognized from newspaper headlines about tech billionaires and real estate moguls, cryptocurrency wallets established years before most people had heard the term. The numbers were staggering: $23,478,612.37. But it was the handwritten letter bearing my name that truly devastated me. In Robert's familiar script, he explained how he had quietly built this fortune through careful investments, starting in our early marriage, technology stocks purchased when companies were startups in garage operations, real estate in emerging markets bought when land was cheap and possibilities were infinite, cryptocurrency acquired when most financial advisors dismissed it as internet fantasy. Every decision calculated, every risk assessed, every dollar grown with the patience of someone who understood that real wealth required time and wisdom. My darling Geraldine. The letter began, "If you are reading this, I have left you not just my love, but the financial security I always promised to provide. I kept this secret not out of distrust, but out of protection. Money changes people, and I feared how this knowledge might affect our family dynamics, particularly with Marcus. Our son has a gambling problem that could destroy everything we have built. I have watched him accumulate debts that he hides from us, seen the desperation in his eyes when he asks for loans, witnessed the anger when we set boundaries. This inheritance must be protected until you determine the safest way to secure our family's future." As I absorbed the magnitude of this revelation, pieces of Robert's behavior that had puzzled me for years suddenly made sense. The mysterious phone calls he would take in his office with the door closed. The weekend trips he claimed were for continuing education seminars. The calm confidence with which he approached our retirement planning, despite what I assumed was our modest savings. He had been living a double life not out of deception, but out of love and protection. The letter continued with specific instructions for accessing the accounts along with contact information for a private wealth management firm in New York that had been handling his investments for over a decade. Robert had even provided detailed recommendations for estate planning strategies that would minimize tax implications while ensuring the money could benefit our family for generations. But his final words chilled me to the bone. Trust your instincts, Geraldine. If anyone pressures you to make quick decisions about this money, be suspicious. If Marcus becomes overly interested in our financial affairs, be cautious. And if you ever feel unsafe, contact Agent Maria Rodriguez at the FBI. Her card is in this envelope. I pray you never need her help, but I sleep better knowing you have that option. I sat in that hidden alcove until dawn, alternating between grief over my husband's death and shock over his secret legacy. The woman who had gone to bed the night before was a widowed schoolteacher with a modest pension. The woman who watched the sun rise was a multi-millionaire with a target on her back that she was only beginning to understand. The first sign that something had changed came 3 days later when Marcus appeared at my front door carrying grocery bags and wearing an expression of concern that seemed genuine but felt rehearsed. He had not visited unannounced in over 2 years, preferring to call ahead, and usually only when he needed something. Yet here he stood claiming he was worried about me living alone and wanted to make sure I was eating properly. "Mom, you look exhausted," he said, setting the bags on my kitchen counter and beginning to unpack items I hadn't asked for. "I've been thinking about Dad's affairs. Have you met with the lawyers yet? Do you need help going through his papers? I know how overwhelming financial stuff can be for you." His questions felt intrusive rather than caring. When I mentioned that I was handling things slowly and deliberately, taking time to process each decision, Marcus became visibly agitated. He suggested repeatedly that I shouldn't burden myself with complicated paperwork, that adult children should step in during times like these, that quick action was necessary to prevent problems with tax authorities and estate administration. Over the following weeks, Marcus's visits became a regular occurrence. He would arrive with small gifts, offer to run errands, and inevitably steer our conversations toward financial matters. Had Dad left any investment accounts? Were there safety deposit boxes I hadn't checked? Had the lawyers mentioned any unusual assets? Each question felt like a fishing expedition, and his disappointment was obvious when my answers provided no useful information. During one particularly uncomfortable visit, I discovered Marcus in Robert's office supposedly looking for a book to borrow. He claimed he was interested in reading about investment strategies, hoping to learn from his father's expertise. But the way he was searching through drawers and examining the bookshelves suggested he was hunting for something specific rather than browsing casually. My suspicions intensified when I returned home early from grocery shopping and found clear evidence that someone had been in the house during my absence. Papers on Robert's desk were arranged differently than I had left them. Closets showed signs of hasty searching. Even my bedroom had been disturbed, with dresser drawers slightly askew, and my jewelry box moved from its usual position. When I confronted Marcus about these intrusions, he denied everything, while simultaneously volunteering to change my locks and install a security system. His offer felt more like an attempt to control access to my home rather than genuine concern for my safety. I declined, claiming I wanted to maintain my independence and avoid unnecessary expenses during this transition period. The phone calls began shortly after I refused his security assistance. Unknown numbers would ring at odd hours, with either silence or hang-ups when I answered. When I mentioned these disturbances to Marcus, he used them as evidence that I needed protection and suggested I consider moving to a retirement community or hiring live-in help. Each conversation felt like he was building a case for my incompetence while positioning himself as my logical guardian. Marcus's next escalation involved introducing me to David Brennan, whom he described as a family friend with expertise in estate planning. David was a smooth-talking man in his 40s, expensively dressed, and articulate, who spoke confidently about complex financial strategies and the importance of immediate action in estate matters. He explained that delays in transferring assets could result in significant tax penalties and legal complications that could devastate an inheritance. During our first meeting at a restaurant Marcus had chosen, David pressured me to sign temporary power of attorney documents that would allow him to review and organize Robert's financial affairs while I grieved. He claimed this was standard practice, that widows often felt overwhelmed by financial responsibilities and that professional management was essential during the transition period. Something about his urgency and Marcus's eager nodding made my instincts scream warnings. That evening, I researched David Brennan online and discovered information that confirmed my suspicions. Public records showed he had been involved in several lawsuits related to elder financial abuse. A local newspaper article from 3 years earlier described charges filed against him for defrauding a widow of her retirement savings, though the case had apparently been settled out of court. This was not someone I could trust with my grocery money, let alone Robert's hidden fortune. When I shared my research findings with Marcus, his reaction revealed everything I needed to know about his true motives. Instead of expressing concern about David's background, Marcus became defensive and angry. He accused me of being paranoid and overly suspicious, claimed that successful people always faced false accusations from jealous competitors, and insisted that David was our best option for navigating complex estate issues. The pressure tactics escalated when Marcus returned the following week, accompanied by a woman he introduced as Jessica Hawthorne, an estate attorney who specialized in inheritance disputes. Jessica was polished and professional, carrying a leather briefcase and speaking with the authority that comes from years of legal practice. She claimed to have disturbing news about irregularities in Robert's estate planning that required immediate attention. According to Jessica, she had been contacted by Robert several months before his death about updating his will. She produced documents that allegedly showed Robert's intention to transfer a significant portion of his assets directly to Marcus, bypassing traditional inheritance structures to avoid tax complications. These papers required my immediate signature to become valid, and any delay could result in government seizure of assets that rightfully belonged to our family. The documents looked official, complete with legal letterhead and complex language that was difficult for a layperson to understand. Jessica explained each section with practiced expertise, emphasizing the urgency of signing while the estate remained in probate. She warned that questioning these arrangements or seeking second opinions would trigger investigations that could freeze all assets for years and result in massive legal fees that would consume whatever inheritance remained. Marcus supported every word Jessica spoke, adding emotional manipulation to her legal pressure. He reminded me of his financial struggles, his need for stability to start a family with his girlfriend, and his father's alleged promises to provide for his future. He painted himself as the responsible son who was trying to fulfill his father's wishes while protecting me from bureaucratic complications I couldn't possibly understand. But something about their coordination felt too rehearsed, too perfect. Real legal matters are messy and uncertain, yet Jessica had answers for every question and solutions for every concern. When I asked for time to review the documents with my own attorney, both Marcus and Jessica reacted with barely concealed frustration. They claimed that any delay would void the arrangements and force the estate into lengthy court battles that would benefit only the lawyers involved. My isolation became more apparent as I tried to discuss these developments with friends and neighbors. Somehow, word had spread that I was experiencing emotional difficulties following Robert's death. People who had been warm and supportive immediately after the funeral now seemed uncomfortable around me, offering brief condolences before hurrying away. Phone calls to close friends went unreturned, and invitations to social activities that had been regular parts of my routine suddenly stopped coming. I discovered the source of this social isolation when my neighbor Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Marcus had spoken with several people in our community expressing concern about my mental state and decision-making capacity. He had told them I was exhibiting signs of depression and confusion that made him worry about my ability to live safely alone. These conversations were presented as a loving son's concern for his mother's well-being, but the effect was to undermine my credibility and create a narrative of incompetence. David Brennan's associates began appearing in my daily routine with increasing frequency. Men in dark cars would park across from my house for hours at a time. When I went grocery shopping or ran errands, I noticed the same faces in different locations, always maintaining distance, but clearly monitoring my activities. Phone calls continued at all hours sometimes, with voices claiming to be from government agencies, demanding immediate responses to urgent matters that never quite made sense. The psychological pressure was immense. I began questioning my own perceptions and wondering if the stress of grief was indeed affecting my judgment. Marcus and his allies were skilled at gaslighting, making me feel paranoid for noticing their surveillance while simultaneously increasing the behaviors that triggered my suspicions. They walked a careful line between concern and control, always maintaining plausible deniability, while steadily tightening their grip on my daily life. Marcus decided to move in with me, claiming temporary concern for my safety, following the mysterious phone calls, and claiming someone had attempted to break into his apartment. He arrived with several suitcases and immediately began reorganizing my household routines. He insisted on screening my mail, monitoring my phone calls, and accompanying me on errands that I had handled independently for decades. Living with Marcus revealed aspects of his personality that I had never fully recognized. He was charming and solicitous when others were present, but privately he was controlling and manipulative. He would search through my personal belongings when he thought I was sleeping, listen to my phone conversations from adjacent rooms, and ask probing questions about every aspect of my daily activities. When I protested these intrusions, he would become emotional and claim that losing Dad had made him terrified of losing me too. The breaking point came when I discovered Marcus's true desperation during a late-night phone conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I had gotten up for a glass of water and heard his voice from the kitchen, speaking in urgent, hushed tones to someone on his cell phone. Standing quietly in the hallway, I listened as my son revealed the depths of his financial crisis and the extremes he was willing to consider. "The casino debt is up to $180,000 now," Marcus was saying. "These people don't send reminder notices. They send people with baseball bats. I need access to whatever Dad left behind, and I need it immediately. Mom is being stubborn about signing anything. But I think we can work around that if we're creative about the approach." The voice on the other end was too quiet for me to distinguish words, but Marcus's responses painted a terrifying picture of their intentions. He discussed options for having me declared mentally incompetent, strategies for obtaining guardianship that would grant him legal control over my assets, and timeline considerations for implementing these plans before his creditors lost patience. "David thinks we can make it look like natural cognitive decline," Marcus continued. "A few doctor visits, some documented incidents of confusion and memory problems. Maybe a small accident that demonstrates she can't safely live alone. Jessica knows judges who are sympathetic to family protection cases. The whole process could be completed in 60 to 90 days if we move quickly and don't give her time to build opposition." My blood turned to ice as I realized they were discussing drugging me to create evidence of mental impairment. Marcus described obtaining prescription medications that could cause disorientation and memory loss, planning incidents that would demonstrate my inability to manage my own affairs, and timing these events to coincide with legal filings that would transfer control of my finances to him before I could understand what was happening. The conversation grew more sinister as Marcus revealed the ultimate scope of their plan. Once they gained access to Robert's accounts and discovered the true extent of his wealth, they would need to eliminate any risk of me recovering and challenging their actions. David had experience making elderly people disappear into nursing facilities where they could be medicated into compliance, and Jessica knew how to structure legal documents that would make recovery nearly impossible even if I regained my faculties. "She's just an old woman," Marcus said with chilling indifference. "No one will miss her if she fades away quietly in some memory care facility. And once we have full control of the assets, we can make sure she's comfortable while keeping her too sedated to cause problems. It's actually kinder than letting her struggle with the confusion and fear that comes with natural aging." David's voice became audible as he moved closer to Marcus's phone, and I heard him outline even more disturbing possibilities. He described previous cases where elderly victims had suffered fatal accidents after their assets were secured, making it appear that grief and depression had led to tragic but understandable outcomes. Insurance policies could provide additional benefits, and proper timing could prevent any investigation into the circumstances surrounding these deaths. The casual way they discussed murdering me for money revealed that I was dealing with practiced criminals rather than a desperate son and his questionable advisors. David's operation was clearly sophisticated, targeting wealthy elderly people through their family members and using legal and medical systems to provide cover for what amounted to organized theft and murder. I remained frozen in that hallway for nearly an hour, listening as they refined their timeline and assigned specific responsibilities for implementing their plan. Marcus would begin introducing subtle doses of medication into my food and drinks, creating documented evidence of cognitive decline. David would arrange for friendly medical evaluations that would support incompetency findings. Jessica would prepare legal documents that could be filed immediately once the medical evidence reached sufficient levels. Their conversation ended with an agreement to begin the next phase of their operation within 48 hours. Marcus would start with mild sedatives that would cause confusion and memory problems without being immediately detectable. They would document my resulting disorientation through video recordings that could be presented as evidence of natural deterioration, building a case that would convince any court that protective guardianship was necessary for my own safety. What Marcus and his accomplices didn't know was that I had been preparing for this confrontation for 2 weeks, ever since my research into David Brennan had revealed the true nature of their operation. The grieving widow they thought they were manipulating was actually a woman who had spent her career managing classrooms full of children, developing the organizational skills and strategic thinking that effective teaching requires. I had simply applied those same capabilities to protecting myself and Robert's legacy. My first step had been contacting Agent Maria Rodriguez, whose business card Robert had hidden with his letter. Maria specialized in elder financial abuse cases and had been tracking David Brennan's activities for over a year. When I called her office and mentioned Robert's name, she immediately agreed to meet, explaining that my husband had actually contacted the FBI months before his death, with concerns about Marcus's gambling debts and potential criminal associations. Robert had been more aware of our son's situation than I realized. Through his financial industry connections, he had discovered that Marcus owed significant money to organized crime figures, who were known for using family pressure to collect debts. Robert feared that Marcus's desperation might lead him to target our assets, and he had begun documenting concerning behaviors and building a case file that would protect me if his fears proved justified. Working with Agent Rodriguez, I had spent 2 weeks gathering evidence of David and Jessica's fraudulent activities. We installed hidden cameras throughout my house that captured Marcus searching through my belongings and recorded his phone conversations about their developing plans. The FBI had been monitoring David's communications for months, building a comprehensive case against his operation that involved multiple victims and millions of dollars in stolen assets. The most difficult part of our strategy was allowing Marcus to believe his plan was working, while gathering the evidence needed to ensure successful prosecution. I had to pretend ignorance while he escalated his psychological pressure, act vulnerable while he positioned himself as my protector, and appear isolated while actually coordinating with federal agents who were documenting every aspect of his criminal conspiracy. Sarah had been secretly involved in our protective operation from the beginning. When Agent Rodriguez contacted her in Portland, she immediately flew back to Connecticut and had been staying in a safe house while monitoring the situation through FBI surveillance equipment. Her apparent distance and unavailability had been carefully orchestrated to make Marcus believe I had no family support, encouraging him to accelerate his timeline and expose the full scope of his criminal intentions. The night Marcus drugged my water glass, I was ready for him. Hidden cameras captured his actions, and the tampered drink was immediately secured as evidence while I pretended to consume it. My performance as a drugged and disoriented victim allowed Marcus and his co-conspirators to believe their plan was succeeding, while actually providing the final pieces of evidence needed for their arrest. As Marcus called David and Jessica to the house for what they thought would be the beginning of my incapacitation, FBI agents were positioned around my neighborhood recording their conversations and preparing to move when sufficient evidence had been gathered. The recordings captured them discussing previous murders, revealing the full extent of their criminal operation, and ensuring that all three would face federal charges that carried life sentences. When the FBI team entered my house at 4:37 that morning, Marcus was in the middle of rifling through Robert's office, while David and Jessica discussed which nursing facility would be best suited for keeping me permanently sedated. Their shock at seeing armed federal agents was nothing compared to their disbelief when I sat up from my supposedly drugged stupor and began recounting the crimes I had just heard them confess. Marcus's first reaction was denial, claiming he had been trying to protect me from David and Jessica's scheme. But the recordings were crystal clear, and his own voice provided irrefutable evidence of his leadership role in planning my abduction and murder. David and Jessica attempted to claim they were legitimate professionals who had been deceived by Marcus, but FBI evidence files dating back months proved they had victimized multiple elderly people using identical methods. The arrests were swift and comprehensive. Marcus, David, and Jessica were charged under federal statutes covering organized crime, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, and financial fraud. Additional charges were filed as the investigation revealed the full scope of their operation, including the deaths of 3 previous victims, whose families had never suspected they were murdered for their inheritances. 18 months after that terrifying night, when I watched my son plan my murder for money, I sat in a federal courthouse as Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Marcus to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole. The man I had raised, taught to ride a bicycle, and cheered at Little League games showed no remorse as he was led away in handcuffs. His final words to me were not an apology, but an accusation that I had destroyed his life by refusing to share money that he believed rightfully belonged to him. David Brennan and Jessica Hawthorne received life sentences for their roles in what prosecutors described as one of the most sophisticated elder abuse operations ever prosecuted in federal court. Evidence presented during their trials revealed that they had stolen over $40 million from elderly victims across 6 states, and that at least 7 people had died under suspicious circumstances after their assets were transferred to accounts controlled by David's organization. The psychological recovery from discovering that my own child wanted to kill me for money has been the most difficult challenge of my life. The initial months were filled with a grief deeper than what I experienced when Robert died, because this loss came with the additional burden of betrayal and the knowledge that the person I had loved unconditionally had seen me only as an obstacle to wealth. Sarah has been my anchor throughout this healing process. She took a leave of absence from her job in Portland and moved back to Connecticut, helping me navigate the complex emotions that come with such a profound betrayal. Through long conversations and patient support, she helped me understand that Marcus's actions reflected his choices rather than any failure in my parenting. We have grown closer than we ever were during her childhood, building an adult relationship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to family values that Marcus had rejected. The financial legacy that Robert worked so carefully to build has become a force for positive change rather than the destructive influence he feared it might become. Sarah and I established the Robert Chen Memorial Foundation, focusing on programs that protect elderly Americans from financial abuse and provide support for families dealing with gambling addiction. We have funded research supported legislation and created educational programs that have already helped thousands of people recognize and escape situations similar to what I experienced. My relationship with Agent Maria Rodriguez evolved from professional cooperation into genuine friendship. She helped me understand that Robert's decision to contact the FBI demonstrated his deep love for me, and that his careful planning had ultimately saved my life. Maria continues to work elder abuse cases, and she often calls on me to speak with other victims who are struggling to accept that family members could pose such threats to their safety. The money itself has become less important to me than what I learned about my own strength during those terrifying weeks. I discovered that the quiet school teacher, who had always deferred to others' expertise, was actually capable of strategic thinking, careful planning, and decisive action when circumstances demanded courage. Robert's letter had been correct when he expressed confidence that I would find the strength to protect our family's legacy. But I don't think even he anticipated how much I would need to protect it from. I still live in our family home in Fairfield, but now it is truly mine, in ways it never was when I was simply Robert's wife and Marcus's mother. I have taken control of the investments Robert built, working with ethical financial advisors to grow the fortune while using its income to support causes we both believed in. The hidden room behind the bookshelf has been converted into a small office where I manage foundation business, transforming Robert's secret space into a center for openness and positive action. The hardest moments come during holidays and family occasions when Marcus's absence creates painful reminders of what our family lost to greed and addiction. But I have learned to focus on the family I still have with Sarah and on the extended family we have created through our foundation work with other families who have survived similar tragedies. Sometimes people ask if I regret not trying harder to help Marcus before his problems escalated to criminal behavior. The honest answer is that I probably enabled his poor choices for years by rescuing him from consequences that might have taught him important lessons about responsibility and integrity. But I have also learned that some people will choose destructive paths, regardless of the love and support they receive, and that protecting yourself from their choices is not selfish but necessary. The $23 million that Robert accumulated through decades of careful planning has become something far more valuable than mere wealth. It has become a tool for protecting other families, a foundation for my renewed relationship with Sarah, and proof that love and wisdom can ultimately triumph over greed and betrayal. More importantly, it has taught me that real security doesn't come from money, hidden in secret accounts, but from the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it breaks your heart. Robert's final letter included words that I return to whenever I doubt the decisions I made during those difficult months. Trust your instincts, Geraldine. You are stronger and wiser than you know, and I have complete faith that you will protect what we built together. He was right to trust my instincts, and I was right to trust his warnings about the dangers that money could create within our own family. I still think about Robert's words in that letter. He knew our son better than I wanted to admit, but he also knew me better than I knew myself. He trusted I would find the strength to do what needed to be done. And in the end, that trust was worth more than $23 million. What would you do if you discovered that someone you loved was planning to harm you for money? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own safety? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please hit that like button. If this story reminded you that sometimes the greatest courage comes from protecting yourself and others from people who have lost their way. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family secrets and the strength we find when we need it most. Share this video with anyone who might be facing difficult decisions about family relationships and money. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you are stronger than you know, and that doing the right thing is always worth the cost. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and remember that real wealth comes from living with integrity and protecting those who cannot protect themselves.